So someone in chat asked me like what my definition of what art is. So to me, art needs to be motivated by an artistic intention. It's kind of redundant. Like it sounds like a really stupid idea, but it needs to be motivated by an artistic intention. So art has to be artistic. Well, there might be a bit more to it than that, right? What is an artistic intention? An artistic intention is the intention when you make an artwork to communicate something, to communicate an idea, an experience. And the best artists communicate ideas and experiences while knowing the context in which they're communicating these ideas and experiences. Right? You have to be very tuned with how the world wants to see or perceive those ideas and experiences. How will you best be able to convey them through your ideas and experiences? How will you best be able to convey those ideas and experiences through whatever art you're trying to make? And that to me is art. There's not much else to it, at least for me. There's no technicals about it. There's no need for it, for the technicality of it. There's no need for the, there's not even a need for its permanence. You can make art that's not permanent. Performance art is not permanent. You can make art that has zero techniques. And when people think of art, they think often of art as artisanry. And I don't think it is a word in English, artisanry. Well, apparently it is. Artisanry, the work of an artisan. I believe a lot of people confuse artisanry and art. And it's not, or artisanship. Yeah, that also works. Yeah, the artisan is worth defining here too. You're right. So let's go over artisanry or, artisanship or the work of an artisan. An artisan is someone who will very often use traditional techniques to make an object, a cultural object. I can give you examples of artisanship. I don't know if it's that popular of a term in English. It's a term, at least in French, which is my first language, that is very, very popular. These are examples of artisanry. You'll have jewelry, for example, wood carving, pottery is often one of them. Textiles are very often considered artisanry. I guess it depends from culture to culture, but these are cultural products, right? They're very often associated. See, there's the textile I was talking about. Like as I said, in Quebec, there's the ceinture fléchée, which is this. It's like a really thick belt kind of thing. And making this requires technique. It requires, it's very often cultural, and it's very often the product of a tradition within that very culture. When I make that distinction between art and artisanry, I don't believe that one is more important than the other. I don't think that one has more worth than the other. Maybe I do, but even if I do, it's not important. I think they have both very different roles. So it's not like art is here and artisanship is like art, but less meaningful or less important. I think artisanship is here, art is here, and at the top, it's like culture. Both are part of culture, but one is more focused on the technique and the tradition and conserving that tradition and that technique. The other is more about creating conversations and about changing the world, right? Or at least interacting with the world. Now, can both sometimes overlap? Well, yes, there's an artist right now who's working in the house in a studio that's really close to, like, in my house. And she works with textiles, but uses it to actually say something about, the world. She has an artistic process, an artistic intention. But she'll say it herself. I don't have, even though I make my living off of textile and making art with textile, I don't have the technique or the technical proficiency that many artisans will have in the region who make this either for fun or, to actually sell them. There's different ways of, artisanry all across cultures. Yeah, very often, as Bahoa says, there's a utility to artisanship, but very often it's not necessarily utility. It's just the cultural relevance of it, because there's a long tradition of this kind of thing. Pottery is one as well, right? Pottery doesn't have any messages. Pottery doesn't even have that much of utility because we use sturdier, cheaper, and just better materials for our pottery, or for putting stuff in our, for conserving food or drinking water or drinking coffee or whatever. However, there's still like a technical element to it that's kind of beautiful, and the tradition of it that's also kind of beautiful, but that's artisanry. And we agree with the fact that pottery is not necessarily art, it's more artisanry. But the thing is, this artisanry versus art kind of distinction is never applied to painting. And we kind of assume that all art or all painting is art. But I don't believe it is. Let's look at Bob Ross paintings. I believe that this is artisanship. The reason why is because it's not saying much. It's beautiful and it's technically proficient. It's part of a tradition, landscape tradition, that's being emulated here. But I think it has a lot more to do with artisanship, meaning the production of cultural relics or cultural products, whatever, through technical proficiency. Then it is art with an actual artistic intent, which tries to convey an emotion or an experience or an idea within a specific context. There are different ways in which both can overlap, right? Like now we're talking about the message, all the gay messaging on ancient Greek pottery. I don't know if the ancient Greek pottery actually had a message, like an artistic intent, because there's also a difference between artistic intent and just a message, right? If I make a pottery and I put the canvas logo on it, I don't think it's art, even though I'm conveying the idea of the canvas. I'm conveying the idea of, it's still a message, right? It's a message of brand of promoting the brand that is the canvas. There needs to be an intent behind it. You can have artisanship with messages as well, right? Because here, I guess you could have a message about this here, which is like, I love mountains, or whatever. I love lakes and like I love when there's a body of water in front of mountains. But I don't think it necessarily means that it's art. Yeah, in ancient Greece, being really good at copying other artworks was considered to be high art. So artists would often copy other statues and stuff. And I think before, that was considered art, but I don't think it's considered art anymore. I think the definition of art is always changing, and it's changed all throughout history. It's why people will say that the Sistine Chapel is art, despite maybe despite it working better with the definition of artisanry. I believe the Sistine Chapel is more like artisanry, personally. I believe a lot of artists who just copied statues because it was considered high art, I consider that more into like being more technical than actually artistically intended. And unless the technical part of making an artwork is the artistic intention, I don't think the technical part of the artwork makes it an artwork. The art here is the imagination of the nature captured, the immense serenity being communicated to the viewer. I don't know how much that's I guess it's always like, how do you say it? It depends. I think most people wouldn't accept that. I'm saying most people would accept that. I'm not sure how saying that this is, the art here is like the imagination of the nature captured, the immense serenity being communicated to the viewer. I think it's not that relevant, because you can say that about any piece of artisanship as well. You can say that about, hey, look, I'll take, you know what? I don't even need to do anything. Look, this chemise was created in a factory, but it was created with the intention of clothing the people, which is an art in itself. And they did it in a very specific way and with a very specific pattern that is pretty relevant to the culture in which I live. And it conveys actually the need for example, Canadians, because this is like very Canadian, how do you say this, attire, to shelter ourselves and to, to cover ourselves from the very hard winters of our country and of our nation. This isn't only a chemise or a blouse or whatever. This is a personification. It's the materialization of us being sheltered from the winter. Like, you can do that shit about anything, about things that isn't actually art. Here, like, this motherfucker here probably just did a painting because he thought it would look cool, because he likes Bob Ross and he thinks, hey, this is nice. Look at that with the clouds and the nice mountains and the trees and the lake. We love that. It's beautiful. Composition, color, technique, all into that feeling and cohesiveness. To me, composition, color, technique, all of that at this point in time in history is artisanry. It's all technique. Even composition to me is technique. Color, is technique. Technique in the sense of skill or ability in a particular field. In the skill in doing visual images. To me, that's all artisanry. What about the death of the artist? How would you interpret the artistic intent? Good question. Death of the artist. How would you interpret the artistic intent? I think the artistic intent of the artist is always important to know, but is not the final word. And I think that there is an artistry in interpreting artworks and giving them a second meaning. I feel like I've done that before, right? Seeing an artwork and putting words on how I think, on what I think it means. Yeah, Goya is the monster. Saturn devouring his son, my second most viewed video on my channel, is the kind of interpretation that I did that Goya never said. Well, actually, Goya never actually showed his paintings. So you can only interpret what these paintings mean. And I think that there's an artistry in that process. And you'll never know what Goya's intent was for these artworks, which is interesting. Which is, I think, part of the reason why these paintings are interesting, is because you don't know the intent, because it's impossible to know because he died. Oh, by the way, Kalapia says, depends on how the artist died, and people to interpret some artist's last work as a symbol of death. But no. But death of the artist means how the interpretation of an artwork has nothing to do with the artist's intent or the artist themselves. Once an artwork is produced, the interpretation of that artwork is up to the viewer completely. Which is a concept I really, really like. Yeah, as Bohoa says for my thing, you just turned it into art through your messaging about it. Yeah, it's true. I agree with that. But on its own, it lacks that messaging. Yeah, on its own, I think it becomes like artisanship, or just like a product like any other. But yeah, through the messaging, you can turn anything into art. Can you turn your dirty mic cover into art? How do I do this? Yeah, there you go. My mic is naked now. All right, I'm going to put this in the washer. We can never know the exact artistic intent of an artwork, as it can only be speculated upon and distorted by the limits of language. The intent this way becomes irrelevant. I think the intent is like super important. But I do think the intent is super important, even though it's limited by language, right? It's like distorted and it limits the language and all that. I think the intent is still important. If I wash it, it's not art anymore. What did you mean to describe it like my shirt? What did you want it, Krena? Oh, this? I think anything can become art. I genuinely believe that, with the right contextualization and conceptualization. Like, conceptualize something into art. It's just, is it going to be good? And I feel like if it's not good and if it doesn't reach people, it's not art. But there's like a completely arbitrariness to that definition, kind of, right? Here, this is what you wanted me to do, right? This is a mic cover, but it's not any mic cover. It's the mic cover I've been using for a couple of years for the canvas. And you know what? You might think, all right, this is just a mic cover that you use for the canvas for a couple of years. But to me, it means so much more. And I believe that through my interpretation of this mic cover, I might make you believe that this is so much more than it actually is. Because though this might look like a dirty mic cover, each speck of dust, or whatever you would call them, and you know what's interesting? We don't even know what they're called. Is it dust? Is it kind of hair? What is it? Well, we don't know. And what's interesting is I've often recorded myself and how like in front of the camera, and we can never tell which speck of dust was there first. And I believe that because of that, every speck of dust is equal. Some of them have been there before. Some of them have been there since I started this channel. And some of them have just added themselves. But you know what? We don't know which is which. And there's a beauty in that. There's a beauty in this uncertainty. Thank you. Tate Modern is in your DMs. So do we need to publicly engage in art if art is intent and intent is really subjective? At least with artisanship, we have some level of objectivity. I think for art, yeah, I think there needs to be, all right, there needs to be a public engagement with your art, unless the fact that it's not publicly engaged is part of the artistic intent. I think that will be my answer. Welcome back, Ryan Stifler. Making rice great. In case you didn't know, Ryan B. Stifler, we're making a difference between, we're making showing the difference between artisanry and art. How artisanry only relies on technique and art relies on more of the concept. I believe conceptual art is a pleonasm. A pleonasm is redundancy in linguistic expression, such as black darkness or burning fire. And conceptual art, to me, is a pleonasm. My idea of it is that art requires a message and an ability to be interpreted beyond its physical appearance or functional use. Intent doesn't have to be specifically artistic, but analysis provides all the meaning we need. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, but like in that, because like for that, then like the artist is not the person who makes the work. The artist is the person who analyzes it. Which, you know what, I make my job is to analyze artworks. So you know what, I'm going to call myself an artist from now on.